Welcome, everybody. So this is going to be a little bit of a off week-ish that I needed to pause a little bit to kind of think about how to structure things. And so we've been having a discussion on Slack, which is going to flash on your screen for a second while I move that. I just want to kind of continue that. I have some structure for the conversation, but I want to, get feedback about some of the things that I'm trying to, or that I'm thinking about doing here. All right, so I think everything is arranged on my screen. So I want to step back and talk about like the learning objectives, kind of the concept of them, and then what I, that list that I shared. A sec. All right. Sorry. So first I want to talk a little bit about why. So why am I so obsessed with this list? First off, I want to talk about something that Kevin and I talked about a little bit on Slack. That I want to, or I'm expecting that people are coming in here. This is the kind of book that you read when you have problems to solve, or you want to know how to solve problems. Like it's something you are reading it to learn how to do things, not much to learn like the concepts. And I guess I want to pause there. Like, I'm not saying you don't want to learn the concepts, but you want to learn the concepts so that you can do things. Like you probably don't care just on its own what a HTTP request looks like, but you care how to make an HTTP request, or you will care about that once you get into the book. Does that make sense? Does anyone disagree? So, okay. Because of that, like we talked about, I want to really focus on these skill-based learning objectives. And those come along with the sentence, after you read this chapter, you will be able to. That's how all of the learning objectives basically start. You can think of in your head. Anyway, so that's the kind of general broad strokes about what I'm thinking. I have traditionally almost always had, understand blah 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 as learning objectives, or recognize, or the things that are purely conceptual, like not really about doing things. But I think I want to really focus everything in on what you'll be able to do. And then underneath that, there will be things that come along for the ride, but they're not the focus of structure. Anyway, so that's a thing that's been kind of clarifying for me. It's helping me develop the list, because it's okay. Then I have to sit down and think, what do I want you to be able to do when you finish? That's what I focus on. And if there are concepts you have to learn as we go, then we'll bring them in as you need them. All right. At any point, feel free to raise your hand or just jump in. There aren't that many of us. And I will pause longer if I really, really need feedback, which I think there will be points here. All right. So why do these matter? Why am I kind of obsessing on these? Well, first is I don't have the citations handy, but students learn more when they have their objectives. When you tell students, when you finish this, you'll be able to blah, 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 then they know kind of what they're looking for. And it just primes them to actually remember materials. So I think that it's a useful framework to build everything in, so that I'm thinking that way, so that the students can be thinking that way. But then the other thing is that I like having a process. I like having something to kind of build things around. And so I am trying to really nail down this process of work out what are the skills that we're trying to get to. I'm actually kind of leaning towards, I won't really think in chapters. I'm going to think in those skills. And then they'll break apart into chapters as it makes sense, but I'm writing little bits for those skills. So yeah, I like having that structured, and I'm going to read Gabby's comment. Yeah, so Gabby said the key about learning objectives is that it gives a guide to you on what you should focus that lesson or chapter on, and is especially important for students because it gives them a guide on what to focus their attention on. So she agrees on carefully curating my learning objectives. Yes. So yeah, they can be skill-based, content-based, or even attitude-based. That was some research that I was mostly rereading in the last week. And yes, I want to focus on the skill side of things. All right. And then the other reason for this is something I'm trying to implement kind of across R4DS. I want to start tracking pretty much everything to skill-based learning objectives. If we're doing question answering, eventually I'd like to tag those questions with what do you need to know in order to answer this question, so that we can kind of just make everything better. All right. So for the rest of this, I want to go over the first half, the learning objectives that I came up with, the skills, and kind of walk through what I have. I think there are a couple of things that I've talked about them before, but I want to really nail down whether it makes sense for them to be in this book or if they're kind of beyond the scope of what people would be expecting. And then just find out if there's anything missing. All right. So this is, my brain dump of learning objectives. Clean these up very slightly from what I've posted on Slack, but I haven't even gotten, there's one to add that I don't have in here yet. So let's just walk through. So again, like I said on Slack, the order here is not necessarily the order. I don't know yet, like if I will start with how to find useful APIs. I kind of feel like I'm leaning towards this will be kind of incorporated in the first project we're doing, is learning about how to find APIs, but this order isn't set in stone. And I tried to make them there are certain ones that can change order, and I tried to kind of allow for that. So sorry, and this was the one that we talked about a little bit on Slack, that I want you to be able to find out what cool things you can do, and part of that will be kind of defining what makes an API useful and how to kind of evaluate APIs. So that's where some of that understanding style learning objectives come along for the ride in developing this skill of discovering useful APIs. Very closely related to that is finding specific APIs. If you're working with Jira or Asana or ClickUp or or Trello, different task tracking systems, maybe you want to find the APIs to work with those systems. Or if you're working with YouTube videos like we've done for our DS things, you want to be able to find the APIs. I've got some of this worked out with what I've been showing with apis.guru. I have some irons in the fire right now of learning some tricks for searching for these. I've had some stuff that I've needed for work that I'm doing, and the API, I can see it's there, but it's not well documented, and it's not, things like that. So being able to, I'm trying to up these skills, and then I will share those. And then we get into the stuff we looked at in this, what was chapter 2, and what largely will remain chapter 2 is fetching data with what I'm calling simple APIs. This is where there's no auth, there's authentication. You don't have to deal with headers. You don't have to deal with anything fancy. It's effectively just a web page that you go to a certain URL and it'll load whatever you want. It's structured as an API, and so it starts getting into like those query parameters and everything, but it's not super, it's nothing tricky is the idea there. Yes. Okay. When I don't have my note here, but I thought I had written a note about this, but for this fetch data with simple APIs, we'll get back data, and we're just going to do like the minimum to get the data out. Oh, I just lost my screen, so that wasn't helpful. Okay. I have a later learning objective about like actually dealing with the data that you get out beyond just getting a list that then you can go to R4DS or something to learn how to process that. So okay, next up we have fetching lots of data from APIs. This is where I'm going to talk about a concept of called pagination. I want to put, well, again, these aren't the order, but they're kind of the order that I want to put this pretty early because like you could do so much with just the fetch data with simple APIs. And oh, I just realized that my screens are not quite matching. Why is that happening? My speaker notes don't have the same thing showing. So let's see. Yeah. Okay, there we go. Sorry. So yeah, this is just, you need to be able to like even very early on when we're getting if we do the example of using APIs.guru, like just getting the list of what APIs or what providers do they have available, you need to know pagination to get that. So it's something that's a pretty early concept. Actually, I lied. That's not in there, but it's in the FEC one. Anyway, then we're going to go into, or the thought is to process the fetch data into our standard formats. This isn't really an API specific skill. It's taking a deeply nested list and making it look, making it into a tibble or otherwise dealing with it. But I think it still fits, even though it's not really API specific, because APIs often return really nasty nested data, because that's how a lot of other languages think, basically. So yeah, that's that. Next, we're going to talk about authentication. It's the idea. This is going to be probably a hard chapter. We've been talking about it on Slack that, I mean, there are ways to authenticate with APIs. That's, telling the API who you are, basically. There are ways that are simple, but there are ways that are like the more secure ways are not simple. And my goal here is to make it at least kind of make sense, make it somewhat intuitive, and just a like spoiler alert for part 2 of the book, when we're making our own APIs, I think this will become a lot clearer, because I think we're going to make the OAuth system, we're going to make one in Plumber so that you could have your own apps that have, or your own APIs that allow people to use them as other users. And that'll all make sense when we get into it. And then I have my really sloppy skill of do other things with APIs. And this is where we're going to get into, like, so far we've just been fetching data. Not that that's, not cool, but there's so much else that you can do where you are actually sending and updating and deleting data, telling things to do things. I think, like, again, order's not set in stone, but I do think that I want to keep this fairly late, because there's all these other complications to deal with. Let's just think about the fetching data until we get all that out of the way is the idea, especially because, this is R. Probably 99% or 90% of the time, you're going to be wanting to grab data if you're doing it in R. This is the chapter where I think I'm going to dig into that curl translate function. So I might kind of show it before then, but honestly, probably not. And it's where we're kind of going to circle back and put a little bit of formality on some of the things we've learned is the idea. All right, and then I have find R packages that wrap APIs. So I keep kind of debating with myself of if a package already exists, it's probably best to start there. So should I do this earlier? But I think I want it to be late so that you can tell if it's a bad package versus like if it's, if it's your fault or theirs. If you start diving into just finding the package that does what you want it to do before you understand APIs, I think there's a lot of danger. There are a lot of poorly maintained packages, basically, for APIs, and APIs change. If the package doesn't update to match the new API, then it can lead to a lot of frustration. And so I want you to be able to recognize, oh, that error message means it's wrong. The package is wrong, not that you're doing anything wrong. All right, and now the big one that really, it's kind of 3 learning objectives. Use other forms of APIs. And I already asked about this at least once, but I kind of want to hear what people think. So, and okay, good. Rebecca says that the find R packages that wrap APIs being this late makes sense based on kind of everything else that we've been talking about. So cool. So this use other forms of APIs. This is the things I specifically want to talk about. It is a little bit of a grab bag. I plan to probably stick these together into a single chapter. There's graph query language or GraphQL that you might see sometimes. A relatively new one, gRPC, also known as Google Remote Procedure Calls, and then WebSockets. Yeah, so Kevin pointed out that GPT has biased him towards writing his own wrappers versus using other people's wrappers, pasting in API docs to the prompt. So it's quite empowering. It's interesting because I know like GPT is really bad at specifically Hitter 2, but it's also just kind of bad at R. And so I guess, that's where knowing curl translate could be really useful because you could tell GPT to just do it in curl and then take what it says in curl and you can just kind of auto translate to R. So GraphQL, like that's very data centric. I almost have to cover that, I think. gRPC is really popular for like microservices that need to be tightly stitched together. I think I'm going to leave that out of this book because it's possible in R, but I've never seen a use case. And then WebSockets is the one that I keep going back and forth on because it is like real-time communication. And I think we could do some really cool examples in there. But I don't know if it fits in the book. So if anyone has thoughts about that, I'd like to hear them. And if you don't have thoughts about that, then that also says something, I think, that, I don't know if I would need this. The neat thing with WebSockets that I played around with a little bit is like Slack has a WebSockets API that once you activate it, you can like set up, like I had a variable set up that was the latest message in Slack, and that variable in my R environment, anytime someone sent a message, it would update. And that's kind of neat. Like, especially for Shiny, I could see that being useful. And then you can interact both directions. APIs you won't hate. Huh. Well, so yeah, Jim shared a Slack. No. I can't go to that. Yeah. So a workspace, that link did not work. It's cool. Yeah, I like the name. APIs you won't hate. But that there are lots of Slacks around APIs. So I'll look into that. Largest online community of API devs. Interesting. So yeah, I'm leaning right now really strongly towards GraphQL, yes. And then the other two, maybe give them a mention, or like in the chapter at the end, point people to resources on learning more. And it's also just APIs you won't hate.com, because you need, if we just go to APIs you won't hate.slack.com, that won't be an invitation to the Slack. And presumably they have that somewhere on their site, right? Yeah, because it's asking us to sign in. All right, so I'll look at that more later. Oh, I didn't realize, or I forgot that I was sharing that screen. So, all right, cool. All right, and then the other somewhat controversial or questionable chapter is the RVest chapter. There is now an RVest chapter in R4DS. It's not technically APIs, but it's like the fall through of, oh, there's no API for this. I need to scrape this data off of this website. So this is one that I'm questioning whether this is going to fit in the book. I didn't have it in the first draft of the table of contents, and a reviewer recommended it when I submitted my proposal. I was like, oh yeah, that fits. And now I'm going kind of back the other way of, especially now that it's in R4DS, I might just point people to that chapter. I was thinking that I wanted to include it because there are like advanced things that aren't covered in the R4DS chapter, but I'm leaning towards the really advanced things. I should write blog posts and not necessarily count on including them in my book, because for one thing, those are the least stable, tends to be. And so by the time the book comes out, they could already be false. So, oh, and then the last objective is to learn more about accessing APIs. And again, that's where I just want to have a place in all of these parts to kind of dump the things I didn't cover, or things outside of the scope, how to look things up. So that's all I have today is this list. Does anyone have any, I don't know, thoughts, comments, concerns? I do have, I guess I did have that. Oh, I don't think I shared this yet, but there is a survey, right? Yeah, that's the right one. There. It's probably slightly inaccurate because we've already talked about some things. Oh, that's right. Speaking of things we talked about, I didn't add to that learning objective that Federica actually pointed out in an earlier survey of something about choosing basically the Y hitter or Y hitter 2 learning objective. Like, how can you choose what to use and all of that. I do definitely want to go a little bit more deep into that. And then probably like in the early chapter, I'll talk a little bit. And in this last chapter, make sure that people know how to find documentation about hitter and curl, and there's also like R curl. I think R curl is the one that's, I don't know, there's one that's kind of orphaned, and so you'll see it in old code, but I really wouldn't recommend using it. It doesn't get bug updates and things like that. So anyway, so talking about those, I do think that that is worthwhile to have a little bit more clearly. Like there, Jim pointed out that there are way more packages on CRAN that import hitter than import hitter 2. Hitter 2's, I mean, it's been on CRAN for a while, but it's less, the 1.0 is less than a year old now. But it's just, I think it's way easier to understand and way easier to work with. And so, and it's, you know, it's where all the cool things are happening. It is interesting to watch that people say, I can't figure out how to do this in hitter, and Hadley will be like, oh yeah, that's hard right now. Here, I added this function. And so it is really worth, I don't know. I think it's worth using hitter 2, even if you can't figure out how to do something, because you can just go ask and he will support you. That's you know, Hadley Wickham, in case anyone isn't familiar with the R world. All right. So any, I don't know, any questions, any comments, any concerns?
Can you go back to your page of the overview?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Speaker notes tricked me again. I'm like, I'm on that page.
I really like it in general. I think I don't have a, I know you went over it briefly, but I don't have a real understanding for the other forms of APIs section, so I can't, I know you
Yeah,
wanted to kind of have some commentary on it, but since my knowledge is close to,
fair.
I can't. And I think your point about not including RVest since it is covered in R4DS, that sounds totally reasonable to me, aside from just mentioning it as a, you've gotten to this point, there isn't it. I think it's totally worth mentioning, and I also, and then linking to R4DS. And I also think it's worth mentioning, I don't have any concept of what these advanced topics are. I think not wanting to write about something that's not stable is totally reasonable. But I think you might as well mention, or I think it could be valuable to mention the topics, not any
Yeah.
code, but like, oh, here are some things that are solvable that are more advanced. Whatever, I don't
That
even know what concept, what things you're thinking of, but just knowing like what problems are out there that are solvable that you could link to a blog post or not, but
I mean, if nothing else, so all of those concepts have at least one R package associated with them. So that's a good point of, I can at least just point to
yeah,
these exist. Here's why what they are and what they're for. Yeah, the gRPC is really, if you're making like a whole bunch of APIs that need to, or well, yeah, APIs that need to talk to each other, that like it's basically about sending code around, and you like, oh, I'm going to call my Python language model API and execute this code over here. And so it's kind of a different way of breaking things up.
okay.
Kind of. So anyway, I don't think it's super, and I haven't seen any use cases of the packages, so there's that. So they exist, I think, partly just to show how to do it. I don't know, maybe people are actually doing things with it, but I couldn't find anything.
Okay.
Um,
The one other thing I would add
yes,
though
I
is,
oh, go ahead.
oh sorry, I think I mentioned it maybe in my survey, but I think I would add something about terms of service or whatever.
Yes, so it's ironically, Arvest is like the most complete chapter. I started writing that one as a complete chapter, and then I don't know, kind of decided that I didn't like it. I didn't want it first for sure, which is where it was at first. And I put a whole bunch of stuff in there about licensing. Um, and again, there is some in R4DS now, so I'll definitely be referencing that. I got really into it for a Tidy Tuesday a few months ago. So all of that, actually, I'm pretty sure that Tidy Tuesday was because I was writing that thing for the chapter. I can't remember the timing for sure, but yes, I definitely will talk about the like ethics and licensing. So Jim points out that Hitter 2 imports the package curl. That is true, and so does Hitter, and so do a lot of things. The reason that they exist is that curl is written for people who are familiar with curl. The command line, it wraps the library, and it wraps it raw. I don't know. Maybe I'll dig into it, but I feel like because Hitter 2 exists, you don't have to know about that package. If you want to write Hitter 2, you want to write your own package for processing APIs, then you'll need to be familiar with curl. But other than that, I don't think it's, I don't know. It's like you don't need to know early we've had Hadley Wickham on book clubs a few times to kind of like answer questions and talk about what he's up to and all that. And he was reading like this giant tome about SQL during one of them. Because there was a question like, what are you reading now? And it got kind of, it was near a question about where would you advise going after advanced R? And he was reading this giant tome. And so people were like, oh, we should go read that SQL book. And he was like, oh God, no, I'm reading it so you don't have to. And I feel like that's what curl is Hadley built or works with the package curl so you don't have to. Although, and that is funny to see, because there was a bug in Hitter, or not a bug, there was a thing you couldn't do in Hitter 2. And it turned out it was because you couldn't do it in curl. And now it is possible in Hitter 2 with the latest version of curl, because the guy who maintains curl fixed it in curl, and it just kind of came along for the ride in Hitter 2. But Hitter 2 is just like the clearer interface on top of it. So I don't know. We'll see. It's still possible that I'll end up with an appendix about curl or something, because it is kind of if you can't do it in Hitter 2, you probably can do it in curl, although that story I just told says otherwise. But yes. So oh, that's a good point of rate limits. That goes in the fetch lots of data chapter, but I didn't pull it out of in addition to dealing with like pagination, there are, it's not really quite ethics, but it's like being polite in APIs. And so talking about all of that, yes, that is a good point. And yeah, Gabby seconded ethics and ethics and web scraping, and then all of like this fair use, rate limits, scopes. And yeah, I am trying to decide, like, I think there are probably things that really don't belong in the book because they're too esoteric or too unstable or whatever. But I think I'm going to attach a blog to the book so that as I have other things I do, then it'll be there kind of with the book, probably not in the book, but it'll be right there. So yes.
I feel like security is one of those topics that can get really deep.
Yeah, like in both R4DS and Mastering Chemistry, sorry, that's a project I worked on in a former life. Mastering Shiny, Hadley has things that basically say Actually, I guess it's our packages and Mastering Shiny that he kind of waves his hands over some security type stuff, saying, you know, work with people who specialize in it, which I totally agree with. And I will be saying part of that, but in a book about working with web APIs, I feel like we have to get into security to a degree, especially once we were doing the shiny or the plumber side. Yeah. And so that's going to be like, yep, that's hard. And it is to a certain, like, it will always be, hey, if you're really going to be deploying like an API that where security is a big concern, don't do that alone. Hopefully they're not bothering you too much. They're bothering me, but can't come over there get their I don't know why. There's nothing there. The Jim asked before next meeting, is there anything I'd like you to do? I would like you to fill out the survey. I'm going to try to do that every week. If you haven't done this, try to take that into account. Sometimes they hop up on camera. Dante can't help hopping up on camera sometimes because he's a Great Dane. He's very large. Come here, Dante, come here. Come on. Come on. Doesn't want to come to the side of the desk. Anyway, yeah, so yeah, if you have a API that you are either working with or want to work with, throwing that in the chat would be cool. That is something that you know, in the Slack mention, like Kevin's talked about some of the stuff he's been kind of learning and exploring. That's really useful. I know we haven't gotten that far in the book, so some of you probably haven't really done much of anything with that. But if you do have things, especially if you find, oh, they mentioned at work that it'd be nice to work this particular API. You know, those are perfect examples. Like I can bring those in. You know, this book can basically be for those of you who are in the book club, because if you have an example you want to learn how to do, I might as well learn how to do it and use it as an example in the book. So iNaturalist API, definitely share that blog post. Yeah, so go ahead and put that in Slack or here. Either way, it'll show up in Slack when this is posted. Yeah, anything you see, or, you know, like I know we haven't done the one where we go through a bunch of how to find APIs. And so I do want to get that done pretty quick. And talk about what can you do, but you know, a lot of things. We did have the sad one that Kevin was trying to get, and I could see where the API was, but it looks like it's a private API. It's not accessible from outside of their system. Storage of secrets. Yep. Principle of least privilege, scope, certificates. That's one that can be found in encryption. There is an encryption built into Hitter 2 actually, that I've been working with a bit lately. Great and awesome. They have.
Is that like obfuscate thing, or is that different?
So there's two levels. They have the obfuscate is just about whether it prints in the console, basically. And you can use it for a certain level, but then there's encrypt, I think it is, or encrypt. It might just be encrypt, Hitter 2 encrypt, where you give it an object and a key, and it uses the key to create. I think it's a string in a key, so it's, you know, it's text, for example, an API key. So you could kind of add a level of encryption onto a thing that might already have some encryption, or onto, if you want a username to be encrypted or whatever. It's the idea is so that you can put it into a project. Like if you have a whole bunch of different somewhat secret materials that you want to include in a project, and then you could have just one key that unlocks all of them. That's I'm using it right now on a project to encrypt. We get back an API key and then put it in a cookie, and so I'm encrypting the cookie before I save it. Yes. So okay.
Federica has her hand up, by the way.
Oh, sorry, I was trying to catch up on the chat and missed. Go ahead, Federica.
Hello, hi.
Hello.
I was writing something in the chat. I was saying that for example, something that you ask for some example, some API example that to work on to provide, because I suggested to put some case studies. No, you can then show them how to work it up to use an API on whatever website, a specific one. So an example would be the HME website. So the one that, for example, I'm using, I'm looking it through, and I've managed to use the curl translate function that you showed that I didn't know it. So just grabbed the chance to see how it worked, and it worked beautifully. So it's shown the syntax to use, but then at the end of the story, I work it out using Ether, so not Ether 2. Okay. And that was, to me, such as better, so straightforward than Ether 2, because I had to use the JSON, so I just had to, and I found the function easily, and just had to add such as transforming into JSON and then into a data frame, and I had all there. Instead, with Ether 2, that was already data frame, but was like on a landscape. So I had like 400 columns and 2 observations instead. So that it should be all the way around.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I would have to see the code, and we'll get to the point where that doesn't happen. Because Hitter 2 doesn't make data frames as far as I know. So I'm not sure what happened there. So we'll get there. Yeah, I would need a lot more specifics in order to,
so that was a list, but then if you say as data frame, it turned out that so it turned it as a data frame, but on a landscape, so very on the other side.
Yeah.
So you have each observation as a column, and so the opposite how it should be. But I'm sure there's a nicer way to do, but I didn't know the function, so I hadn't much time to go through the documentation. But definitely the curl translate function, it's very useful. So you just put inside the information and release the syntax to use. Yeah.
I would be I'd definitely be curious to see like your code there, because like neither Hitter nor Hitter 2 should have returned pretty, like I feel like if you did what you did outside of Hitter, if you did exactly the same thing to your Hitter 2 return, it should do the same thing. Like the point that they leave it should be the same. So I'd be curious to see what you did. And
Sure,
what was
I'll
confusing.
share it later.
All right, cool. All right. Yeah, we have a little bit of a conversation going on about YouTube bar package that we worked on. Okay. So yeah, so Gabby asked, I have a quick question. If only you knew, but the question that can be quick and it can be really slow or really long. But so to access the data on a website, you can use, header2, RJSON, which is, or JSONLite, JSONify, curl, etc. to access it, or people have written packages to access the API for you. Is this correct? It depends. But yes, for a lot of things, people have written packages to like that turn the API into functions. So instead of you calling whatever the big long complex query to get the data you want, you would call a function and give it some arguments, and then it would turn that into an API call and make it easy to reshape it and do all the things that you want it to do. That is a separate project I'm working on, is to try to make it really easy to make those packages, basically. But like, if no one has done that yet, you need to understand how to interpret their API docs and all that, all the things I'm going to be talking about. And even like with the package I'm writing, it's still going to be really useful to be able to debug, because it's like a common theme you will find, and we will talk about as we go through, is like API docs lie. There are undocumented features. There are, oh, right, that parameter isn't called that anymore. We renamed it 3 versions ago and we forgot to update our docs and things like that. And so being able to understand the error messages is a big part of it, and understand how to read the docs. Just a really big part of it is understanding how to like what the different errors mean. Does there are like a lot of times it'll be common, just to pull on an example, that if you try to read something that doesn't exist, it will give you the same error message as if you try to read something that you don't have access to, because they don't want to tell you that exists but you don't have access to it, because that gives people information about okay, I should keep working on that to try to get it. And so recognizing that this thing that says does not or that says it could either say it does not exist, or it could say you don't have access. Basically, the error messages could go either way, and knowing that those can, or often do, mean the same thing, that kind of thing, like it and knowing, okay, so then what you should do is like go to the UI of whatever it is that you're playing with, like if it's YouTube, go look at the video and see what is the ID that comes up on the video. I'm like, okay, I can access that. That's in my channel. I should be able to get it through the API, that kind of thing. So like I said, long answer to what could be a quick question, that all the way through it, like, packages aren't guaranteed to work. APIs aren't guaranteed to continue to work just because they used to work. And so I always think it's useful to, at some level, be able to interpret. Now, the distinction is, do we go all the way down to curl, or all the way down to like command line curl, or header2, header, different levels of it. But I think like header2, once you learn it, has the best built-in error messaging, has the best ability to deal with things like pagination and all the things like rate limiting. You can just, there are header2 functions that I don't think existed when I wrote my own version of them, that will just kind of automatically do rate limiting. The pagination stuff's really nice. That was something they built in relatively recently, where You just set it up, and then pagination is the idea that it'll give you one page of results at a time each time you call the API. And then in addition to the results, it'll say, okay, to get the next page, send this code. And so you can use wapir02 you give it a little bit of information about that, and then it'll do all the calls to go all the way through and get all the pages. Rather than you having to write a loop to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, I actually had an observation about that, or I know we haven't gotten into that yet, but I was, when I shared in the chat with the pagination stuff I was trying, it was the first time I used that functionality. And at first I used the wrong pagination function, and I used the one that was supposed to be, it's like, there's one that I forget what it's called, that like, it's just like a parameter, but then it increments it for starting from 1, I think, on its own. And then there's another one that actually takes the result of that parameter in the response and passes it to the next request. And I used the former one, and it didn't error. And I asked for like 1,000 items or something. It didn't error, but it just gave me 100 replications of the same 10 items. And like, I wasn't sure if that was like a bug with the function that it should error or something. I don't know. It was weird. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. The problem is like nothing in there will actually throw an error. Like most APIs are really forgiving. If you send extra parameters, they just ignore them. And so what was happening there is you were basically sending the same request over and over and just adding this parameter that the API didn't care about. And therefore there's nothing that wapir02 could catch to say, oops, that's not what you meant to do. So that's, again, knowing how to interpret that, how to dig in and see, are you doing it right? And that's one where I think it's still true that the Slack API has 2 different styles of pagination depending on when the endpoint was made, basically. And so like being able to watch out for, see that in the docs, to be able to see like, hey, I'm getting the same thing over and over. What is that a sign of? Oh, it's probably that they are using a token based pagination or there's a word that I'm not thinking of right now, but yeah, dealing with that. Yes. So Slack API, technically, I think there are a couple endpoints that you don't have to authenticate for that just basically tell you maybe the name of a Slack or, the things you can see on the web without logging in. But for the most part, yeah, you need to authenticate, and there are a few different ways you can authenticate. And it can be complicated. That one has the added bonus that the thing you are using for authentication also has to be like enabled in the Slack that you're trying to connect to. And so there's kind of multiple levels of authentication. There's lots of, it has scopes that we might use that one as an example because it has all the bells and whistles. And I've worked with it quite extensively. We do have a package that one of these days I'm going to rewrite from scratch because it's messy and hard to work with, or hard to update, basically. But yeah, that I use the Slack API. Well, my laptop uses the Slack API every day, and I use it occasionally. But every hour, on the half hour, it does processes to process book club meeting videos. So
can I just make more comment about on the conversation from before about like wrapping APIs? I think the reason why recently, especially with the GPT stuff, that I've done that a lot is because I found that there are so many cases where, number one, the wrapper package is not in line with the current API, and number two, so it's like kind of always going to be a little bit behind, and number two, it's always going to be a subset of the available functionality, pretty much, unless you're you and you're writing way of covering every single endpoint that's at in the API, but like for most things I see out there in the wild, like they don't cover all the possible,
Yeah.
functionality in that wrapper. So like, so I'm like, and then on top of it, this is specifically an experience recently with this Python package for Azure, that like the authentication object didn't like match up with some of the formats and some of the APIs that were in a different version we're expecting, and like it was just this whole mess. And I was like, all right, I'm just gonna get a token using the request library and then just go with it. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with all this abstraction, So I don't know. That's why I've been doing that a lot.
Fair enough. And I mean, I hope to empower that. So yeah, like at a minimum, the API wrapping packages should export a function that lets you call an endpoint, and it just like deals with auth or whatever, it does the baseline things that don't change that often, at least. A lot of times it could deal with pagination, but just you could type in any endpoint. So if they add an endpoint, then you just use that function to hit it. Some of them do that. It is common to be like, oh no, I'm wrapping all the endpoints, so I don't need to export that function. But like I encourage people to still export that function. But yeah, so cool. All right. This was useful. It's good to talk these things out. And so next week, I hope to have something. I don't know for sure what yet. I'm gonna start working with this. So I think likely what I'm going to do is it's going to be material we've already seen kind of, but I'm going to redo that chapter 2 from more of a here's a thing we're trying to do standpoint of we're going to use the apis.guru API to find other APIs. It's going to be very meta, but it's going to have a task that we're trying to do. We're going to get the data. We're going to do some light rectangling of it, and then we're going to use it to make more API calls to get more details about the APIs. I think that's what I'm going to do. It's something I've played with. It's something that I do all the time because when I am writing these packages to deal with APIs, I want like every API to use as an example. So yeah, as long as the website doesn't go down again, that's one thing I might have to deal with. Might have to think about forking that and running my own version of it because I don't want it to go down if it's the example in my book. But other than that, yeah. Okay, so cool. So anyway, I'll have something for next week, and then we'll go on from there. Yeah, the Internet Time Machine API to hit the API of apis.guru. That is so the apis.guru API is just like it's web pages. Like it's you can it doesn't have any auth. It's all just stuff that you can load in your browser if you know what to look for. And it runs on, actually, I keep forgetting that I need to dig into this because it runs on GitHub pages, which I'm not sure how it acts as if it has a server behind it, but more so than GitHub pages would normally have. So anyway, I need to dig into that and see how it works and maybe replicate some of that for the deploying API side of things. It would be intriguing if there is a way to deploy it can't be a Plumber API, but a Plumber-like API using GitHub pages. Anyways, cool. All right. With my random musing there, I think that'll do for this week. So I will see you all on Slack. Bye.